Welcome, everybody. We are going to try to keep this as energy-filled and fast-moving as possible. Real quickly, I thought it might be helpful for everybody to just drop into the chat your organization name, your city, and state. And if you go ahead and do that in the chat, then we'll all get a sense real quickly of where everybody's dialing in from, because we feel like it's a pretty wide range of folks. Good to see Kansas City in the house. I'm from Kansas City. Just a little shout out there. Couldn't resist. So Zini, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, we wanted to be sure to thank our incredible funders, Open Society Foundation, the Shapiro Foundation, Barry Landry, and all of the others that have made it possible for this second round of funding, which is really just going to be an incredible opportunity. Good to see Grand Rapids in the house, Bethany Christian, and all of the others, World Relief from Baltimore. I think we are literally spanning coast to coast today, as well as hitting close to Canada and down to the southern border as well. So that's the goal of the Catalyst Fund, is to really spur that support nationwide. And so it's really great to see everybody here today. Just want to give you a quick overview for the agenda for today. We are in the welcome and co-sponsorship defined phase. I'm going to go through a few slides here shortly, defining co-sponsorship from some slides that were provided by RCUSA. Sarah Kraus couldn't be here today, but I'm going to cover that. And then we have a short video that we put together that includes the voices of some of our co-sponsorships, co-sponsor group leaders, so that you have a sense from them as well as far as how to build the co-sponsorship program. And then we're gonna pretty quickly move through our presenters, going to Chris George, our executive director, who will talk about just like an overview and the program framework. I am going to today impersonate Alexine Casanova, our director of case management, and present her slide and information about how we at IRIS place families with community co-sponsors. And then Ashley McCarr, who is our outreach liaison, will talk to you about group recruitment and application and community preparedness. And then our co-sponsorship manager, Greg Marino, who's online, will go over the program manager responsibilities for his role, really kind of the pillar within our program and the training. And then I'll wrap up with kind of the view from the group's perspective. So we're going to spend the first hour focused on a deep dive on the IRIS program. Then we're going to do a breakout, give you a chance to hit the restroom really quick. And then we're going to want you to just address a couple of questions and meet a couple of your colleagues in those breakout groups. We'll do that fairly briefly. And then after the breakout, we have the benefit of two program highlights, one from Lutheran Social Services National Capital Area, and then also Home for Refugees in Los Angeles, an asylum seeker co-sponsor program. So just a quick overview there of the agenda. And then I'm going to go ahead and introduce these slides that RCUSA had put together to make sure that we all have a good view for what co-sponsorship is. So not IRIS's definition of co-sponsorship, but co-sponsorship as a definition that has been reached by all the various RCUSA participants and members, and in partnership with PRM. So community sponsorship, defined as a larger, the larger continuum, is that a group commits to provide clearly defined financial or in-kind support and volunteer services to newly or previously arrived refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, or other forcibly displaced populations. That real quick word jumble that we all tack on there, because we know we work with more than just those other categories, to support their welcome and integration. And then on the next slide, what they have identified is the continuum. So on one end of the community sponsorship continuum is general forms of that definition of community sponsorship. In the middle is co-sponsorship, what we're going to do a deep dive on the IRIS program today. And then to the far right, to be defined literally with PRM, is private sponsorship. And then on the next slide that they've provided, we actually talk about the why this is distinct from general volunteerism. So how is community sponsorship really distinct? And it's taken on by a group rather than an individual. It pairs a group with an individual or family who's been displaced, and it requires a clearly defined commitment of financial and or in-kind support, and a clearly defined commitment of volunteer services that support welcome and integration, and that the commitment is for a set period. So this definition and then the criteria that makes it different, community sponsorship from general volunteerism, is important because it's key to the Catalyst Fund, and it also ties into key elements of the cooperative agreement with PRM. So we can move on. Lastly, co-sponsorship. So co-sponsorship, again, is within that continuum of community sponsorship, in the middle between general community sponsorship and private sponsorship. But the key difference is that in co-sponsorship, a group accepts in a written agreement that is not legally binding with the resettlement agency the responsibility to provide or ensure the provision of reception and placement services to certain refugees sponsored by the resettlement agency. So fear not, you don't have to write down all of this wonderful terms. We're going to provide you a copy of the PowerPoint as well as a copy of the recording from this. But we wanted to make sure that you had that framework and continuum and those key definitions as we move into the deep dive on the IRIS co-sponsorship program today.
You're probably sick of hearing my voice, so I won't talk very long. I just want to zoom in on this question of why do you want to do a community co-sponsorship program in your area? You know, why would a refugee resettlement agency be interested in using this full co-sponsorship model that we have used and which the video, I think, does a pretty good job of describing? The main reason is it builds strong and expanding community support, public support that can translate to political support if you need it. There's nothing better that we do at building strong public support. It creates ambassadors and friends. It can generate financial assistance for the refugee resettlement organization. It creates advocates that will advocate on your behalf. Imagine in the future, the governor of your state says they want to withdraw from the refugee resettlement program, and you've been doing community co-sponsorship for the past 3 or 4 years, working with thousands of volunteers, 100 groups. They will drive on the Capitol building and protest that governor's decision. That's the kind of support and advocacy that this program will generate. Community co-sponsorship will raise the profile of your organization. And everybody needs that. And everybody knows that we need to have a raised profile now, not work in the shadows, not work under the radar, how some of us might have worked over the past 10, 20, 30 years. We need to have a high profile. We're proud of this work that we do, and community co-sponsorship can help you achieve that. It can help you expand your area of operation. Instead of focusing on the urban or semi-urban area where you've been placing refugees resettled by your staff, you find a community group that's 50 miles away. I understand that the State Department is going to actually enlarge that, that radius of operation. We'll be able to hopefully in the future place refugee families within a 100-mile radius if they have a community co-sponsor. That will benefit the organization, expanding your area of operation and developing more friends and greater support. It can lighten the load of your resettlement staff. If you're resettling, if you've been assigned 3 arrivals in 1 week, and you can place one of them with a community co-sponsor, that's beneficial. In 2015, we resettled 230. refugees, but because we had so much community support and we knew we could place cases with co-sponsorship groups, in 2016, we went from 230 to 530. So you could expand, you could increase the number of arrivals coming to your organization. Now, there are issues that you'll need to discuss. There may be staff who feel, based on experience, that volunteers just can't be trusted to do some of these more difficult tasks and to have these responsibilities. We have found that with proper training and with supervision, the volunteers do a spectacular job. What is the cost of doing something like this? Well, we've found that it actually can cover a lot of its costs, but in order to get the program up and running, it could cost something. That's why the Catalyst Fund is here. You'll want to get staff buy-in. I'll be honest with you, there were a number of people on my staff back in 2015, 2016 who were skeptical, but now they're believers. And but you do need buy-in, and you'll want to get that. And the best way, of course, to turn a skeptic into a believer is to actually do the program and show everyone the great job that a group of community volunteers can do. So this grant it's different from anything else we've applied for. This is not about services to refugees. This is about increasing community engagement. So what the Catalyst Fund is going to be looking for is a proposal that will engage a large number of people in significant, profound ways, like a full co-sponsorship program can do. So that's all I'll say for now. And I think I'm passing it back to my colleague, Ann O'Brien, who is going to talk about, I don't know, what are you going to talk about, Ann?
I'm going to do my best impersonation, which is going to be really, really hard for me, of our Director of Case Management, our Senior Director of Programs, Alexine Casanova. She will join us at the end for the Q&A, but she is super busy right now doing that little thing called an abstract for our, in response to the NOFO. But she will join us at the end. But she has given me her exact notes so that I don't stray. So as on the slide that you can see, you will see our placement numbers for each of the last 5 calendar years. Overall, we welcomed roughly 1,300 more individuals, and roughly 20% of those were co-sponsored. We launched the model at the end of 2015, just as we were prepping for huge expansion of the refugee resettlement program. Syrians were the largest national group that were resettled in 2016, large majority of co-sponsored cases, none of whom had U.S. ties at the time. As of 2017, we saw generally fewer arrivals, and the majority of our clients have been Afghan special immigrant visa holders, or SIVs, all of whom have family and friends already in Connecticut who they want to resettle with. Since 2018, 27% of our refugee clients have been co-sponsored, but only 4% of our SIVs. This leads me to provide a little more detail about the decision-making behind the process of co-sponsorship placements. Generally, we are aiming to place cases with co-sponsors whenever it's possible to do so. The decision is made after we receive a notice of an arrival, usually 2 to 3 weeks before the actual arrival. We do not consider co-sponsorship at the time of assurance, which is when we first hear about the case being assigned to us, because unfortunately, there are too many instances of assured cases being delayed for long periods or never coming at all. There are 2 key questions that are essential deal makers or breakers when it comes to co-sponsorship placement. One is very simple. Is there a co-sponsorship group ready? We'll talk more about that, what that means later. But basically, if there's a group ready, we want to place them with them ASAP. But if none is ready, then placement is not possible. The second is, does the case have a U.S. tie, meaning a friend or family who lives in Connecticut that said that they want to live near to them? If they have a tie, where does the tie live? If there is no U.S. tie, then the case is more likely to be a good fit for co-sponsorship because they have no local connections or network, and they will need as much social support as they can get. If there is a U.S. tie that lives in New Haven, then co-sponsorship doesn't usually make sense. U.S. ties themselves, especially Afghan SIVs, do not see the advantage in a case being co-sponsored because they feel personally responsible for welcoming the new arrivals, and they want them to become part of their local Afghan community. If there is a U.S. tie in a location that is outside of the New Haven area, where it can be harder for Irish to receive new arrivals, then co-sponsorship can be a great way to ensure proximity to the U.S. tie and ensure the highest level service. There are also a few other things that need to be taken into consideration. The size of the case. This is an important one for us. Single individuals and couples are not generally considered for co-sponsorship because their needs tend to be lesser than those of the larger families. Our preference is to place larger families with co-sponsors, and this was the case back in 2016 when many co-sponsored cases had 6 members or more. More recently, we have placed some smaller families and even some couples with co-sponsors in order to keep the program's momentum going. This is a good example, by the way, of the scalability of the program during lower volume versus higher volume times for your organization. The size of the case can also impact the availability of housing. In some places, 3 and 4 bedroom apartments might be hard to find on short notice or at all. Another thing that's very important to consider is the client's language and, and the co-sponsorship group's access to interpreters in that language. This is something that will be verified through the application process that Ashley will address. Also, another important thing is medical needs. Sometimes a perfect match can be made, such as when a family with a paraplegic teen was placed with a co-sponsor group that included a physical therapist in the lead. But the most important thing is that medical needs are communicated with groups, that they understand the implications, and that the required medical providers who accept Medicaid can be found nearby. When arrival notice first comes in, we sift through these considerations very quickly. There is a team of roughly 10 people that are on an email thread that move through this decision tree. Usually the potential for co-sponsorship is pretty clear based on the factors that I just mentioned. The reason why we need to move fast is because we usually only have 2 to 3 weeks notice. And if we offer the case to a co-sponsor group, we give that group 48 hours to make their decision based upon the skills and the readiness that they know they've prepared for. If ever they say they cannot take the case, we will either offer the case to another group and give them 48 hours or decide to resettle the case through our traditional model. I'm going to finish up by sharing what I see as the benefits of co-sponsorship. So keep in mind that I'm Ann O'Brien, but these are truly Alexine, our Director of Case Management's notes. Alexine would say, I should preface this by saying that I wasn't always the most enthusiastic supporter of this program. Having had some previous experience with volunteer groups that did not go very well before this program, I was a bit skeptical about placing so many cases with co-sponsors and needing to manage them. But after 5 years, I can tell you that there are so many benefits to co-sponsorship that I think the initial investment and continuous effort to maintain the program are worth it. Co-sponsors do an excellent job of welcoming refugees, and when well prepared and guided, they're perfectly capable of meeting the government's requirements of refugee resettlement. In addition, refugee families get more attention and a different type of attention from co-sponsor group members than they do from professionals, my case management team. They are welcomed into a community through a lot of social and personal interaction with their new neighbors. They often refer to the group members as their new family and express great satisfaction and gratitude for the love shown them. Community members also express feelings of joy due to the social relationships, and they tell us that they feel useful and proud of how they are contributing to the development and renewal of their communities. Lastly, we have made the decision to reserve our pool funds for traditionally resettled clients in the New Haven area. Pool funds are those that the government provides per individual, giving the agency the ability to shift support as needed. There are a small amount of funds to various clients. This means that there's more money available to support traditionally resettled clients in the New Haven area, and that is a big help. Also, in many cases, co-sponsorship groups do end up raising more than they need, and oftentimes that will, at a much later date, after the group has resettled their family, become a gift to Iris. But that is not why we do it. We do it because the program works and there are good outcomes. So with that, I will stop being Alexine, and I'm going to hand the mic over to to Ashley, who will walk you through how the groups go through their formation phase. Ashley.
Hi, thanks everyone for being here. It's exciting to see people from all over the country. Starting or encouraging groups to become co-sponsors starts with planting seeds. We don't usually approach groups, potential co-sponsors with, a direct, ask of now just resettle a family, because that can be overwhelming. So we tend to have a seed planting approach, which often begins with a desire for community education among various local communities. So you can plan speaking engagements with groups like congregations, neighborhood associations, Rotary clubs, public libraries, clergy associations. And then in those speaking engagements, generally Iris has had a staff member and a refugee speaker. The staff member might do an overview of refugee resettlement and local resettlement and what kinds of services the local affiliate offers. And then the refugee will share from his or her personal experience. And then there will be, a list of ways that you can get involved, everywhere from doing a coat drive all the way up to co-sponsorship, various levels of commitment, and sort of let groups discern what they can do at that given time. But planting the seed of co-sponsorship with every speaking engagement. I want to speak a bit more about refugee speakers, because Iris has found it tremendously effective to engage communities with refugees through what we call our Refugee Ambassadors program. So we have a group of refugees who regularly do speaking engagements with Iris staff members. And some of them are so great and confident, they do these speaking engagements on their own. We tend to, most of our regular refugee speakers are young adults, either late high school or, in their early 20s. We find that this is a really great group from which to recruit and cultivate refugee speakers, mainly because they tend to be more confident in speaking English in front of audiences than refugee adults. And it's a great resume builder for them, as well as, if they're in high school, for their college applications. And we learned a few years ago, when we received a grant to compensate refugee speakers for their time, that it's really a game changer in terms of people's ability to commit, because as we all know, refugees have very busy lives between work and school and family obligations. But when we're able to compensate them for their time, there's a greater level of commitment and consistency. So we tend to, identify these speakers, and then before each speaking engagement, a staff member will do sort of a prep session with them to just, prepare them for a particular engagement. And, some of these youth have become such skilled and confident speakers, they no longer need a prep session. They really are the rock stars of this program. So that's a key to our outreach strategy. Now, the next phase after planting a seed with a community, I usually do a bit of matchmaking. So for groups that express interest in co-sponsorship, and I want to backtrack a little bit. One thing that's really important after these seed planting activities is to follow up with people, get their email addresses, follow up, send them any resources and more information about the opportunities that you offer them. And particularly, obviously, target those that have expressed interest in co-sponsorship. And then I usually do matchmaking with groups that have expressed interest who are in the same geographic area, or based on relative strengths. For example, there might be a Rotary Club that is very well equipped to do fundraising, but might not have, people who can serve as volunteers because everyone maybe has a full-time job. Whereas there might be a congregation that doesn't have much fundraising capacity, but that has a lot of recently retired active congregants who would love to do a project like this. So matchmaking on that basis as well, introducing them over email or through small meetings. And then the next step is to invite groups that are forming or groups that have expressed interest in co-sponsorship to what we call a co-sponsorship orientation. Now, in those orientation sessions, it's usually myself or someone else from the co-sponsorship team will give an overview of the program, of the basic requirements, commitments, and expectations, and the structure in terms of, what kinds of support IRIS is going to be able to offer potential groups, an approximate number of volunteers that we recommend, how their teams can be structured along the various functional areas of refugee resettlement. And a key thing that I emphasize in these orientations is, number one, the importance for each group to have a well-organized leader who's a good communicator, as well as someone who can do volunteer management, because that's a big part of co-sponsorship. And then also orienting the people who have come to the co-sponsorship orientation towards the goal of early self-sufficiency that we are all probably, have heard about and talked about for way too long, early self-sufficiency for newly arrived refugees. And so emphasizing that, they're here because they want to help refugees, but that the helping refugees is with the goal of helping them become independent by helping them access the resources they'll need to become independent. And this can also be another, there can be an element of matchmaking here by inviting groups that are in a similar geographic area to the same orientation session. I found that sometimes it doesn't work if you try to connect them over email, but if you get them in the same room together or the same Zoom room, then the matchmaking can sort of start from there. So now I'm going to move on to the application process. So you heard a bit about that in the video. It is posted on our website, and it's a combination of community assets mapping in potential resettlement locations and a strengths assessment among the group. So for example, the group to know that, they have a retired principal, a retired social worker, the types of people who can really really help do the basic resettlement tasks. And also requires them to do legwork in their communities to identify the resources that refugees are going to need to get off to a strong start and become independent as soon as possible. Internally at IRIS, sometimes we call our application Low Income 101. So it requires the group to, as I said, do legwork in a potential resettlement location to identify affordable apartments, public transportation resources, food pantries, and other community resources. It requires the community group to learn and navigate the systems they'll need to know in order to teach the refugee family how to use them. I mean, most of our community co-sponsors may not know the bus system in their town because they drive everywhere, but we're going to need them to learn to navigate the bus system so that they can teach the refugee family how to do so. And also the application builds on what we do in the orientation. It reinforces the co-sponsor's role of helping refugees access and navigate the resources they need to become independent. And it sort of reorients their charitable impulse towards empowering the refugee family. how IRIS, the next topic is how IRIS prepares groups to engage local leaders. So as we all know, it's really vital to have the public school system, the public safety system, the local government and social services to be collaborating with resettlement agencies to serve refugees and help them build their lives. So if a potential co-sponsorship group will be resettling outside of your catchment area where you've already built those networks, you're going to need to prepare the co-sponsorship group to do that work in their communities. So IRIS, in our model, which you'll learn a little bit about later, but our community co-sponsors, the vast majority of them are outside of the greater New Haven area in various parts of the state. And so we've asked these groups to cultivate those community networks that we've cultivated here in the greater New Haven area. So we require community sponsorship groups to have substantive conversations with public sector leaders in local government, public safety, school administration, and social services. And the goal of these meetings is to educate these community leaders on refugee resettlement, inform them of the group's plans to resettle a family in that town or city, to solicit their questions and concerns, and ideally their support. But as Mike Recker mentioned in the video, it's not a matter of asking for permission, but it's a matter of informing and addressing any questions or concerns that come up, and of course encouraging support, ideally soliciting their support, but not asking permission, as people probably don't want to remember what happened with the executive order a couple of years ago, that we're not asking permission, but we are encouraging and trying to solicit feedback and support and preparing the community to welcome a refugee family. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Greg Marino, who is the co-sponsorship program manager.
Thanks very much, Ashley. So I'm going to give you kind of a rapid fire accounting of training, the green light process, pre-arrival through the first year, and what happens after the first year and post-resettlement period, as we call it. So once a group has submitted an application and everything is favorable, we then invite members of that group to attend training under normal circumstances, and we're hoping those will be restored in the next few months. That would be an all-day training on site at IRIS, as Chris mentioned in the video. And the presentations are given by me and my colleagues across functional areas that would be covered by the co-sponsor group, namely case management, health and mental health, acculturation, education, English for speakers of other languages, transportation, employment, and administration. The importance of having staff at the agency present during this training is extremely important for two reasons. One, it gives the groups an idea of how their groups need to be organized and how you leverage the strengths and weaknesses within your group so that people are taking on activities and responsibilities that they're comfortable with and that they have some form of expertise in. But it also serves as a preparation exercise for IRIS delegating these responsibilities to the group members under my supervision. So I serve two roles. I am the program manager for the groups, but I am also, formally, I am the case manager responsible for all of the co-sponsor families. So while the groups participate in case management, they don't do any of the actual formal submission or tracking of forms. That's something I do. So in connection with that, when a group is ready to accept an offer for co-sponsorship, they have to complete and submit what we have, which is called a green light form. That is on our resource page, so you can take a look at it. But in summary, the purpose of the form is that it certifies the group's readiness. It means that they've organized their groups along the functional areas that we recommend. It certifies that they've raised enough money according to our guidelines. Very importantly, they indicate in what languages they have sourced interpreters so that when it comes time to place a family, the placement decision, it makes it very, very important in terms of assessing which groups are ready, what skill sets the groups have, and what interpreters are available to them. So an offer after internal consultation, kind of what we were talking about earlier, whether the family is appropriate for remaining in New Haven or co-sponsored, we go through the process of serving greenlit, reviewing the greenlit forms to decide which group to offer the co-sponsorship to. And the group has 48 hours to accept or decline the offer. Once the group accepts the offer, they have to accept the offer by submitting a signed memorandum of understanding, which, although not legally binding, is a document that outlines our mutual rights and responsibilities and expectations. And then there is also a pro forma community sponsorship form that our national asks that all community sponsors submit as well. So once everything is squared away, then I can begin the process of sharing the names and demographic information of the family and arranging for a pre-arrival meeting with the group's leaders and their team leads. And during that meeting, we discuss first and foremost their progress in being able to find housing, since they are expected to find permanent housing before the family arrives, which may seem like a Herculean task, and it is, but 99% of our groups have done it. So don't think that it's not possible. Because of where we're situated in Connecticut and because we're statewide, we give groups the option of going to the airport themselves. And for us, that would be JFK in New York City or Newark International Airport, or the family gets transported by airport shuttle to our offices in New Haven, and the family can pick them up there. So we discuss pre-arrival arrangements, and then in detail, we go through the kinds of tasks they're going to need to perform within the first month of the family's arrival. So we go over in detail, based on the size of the family, what the amount of cash assistance the family should expect to get, what amount in SNAP they should expect to get, and what insurance coverage the family would receive, and how to go about applying for those benefits. And another very important task is reminding them that all of the required R&P forms have to be completed in a timely manner. We have those available for download in PDF fillable format so that it can be as easy as possible for the administrative contact of the group to manage. That is a role that we created about 3 years ago because we discovered that the leaders and the co-leaders do not have time to be worrying about forms and filling them out and making sure that they're submitted on time. So when you have somebody in your group whose sole responsibility is to transmit the R&P forms, case file documentation, and case notes to me, it's a much more seamless arrangement. And in line with that, I remind the group that in general, communication between the group and myself should only go through the chairs of the group. And that is so that I can manage the incoming inquiries from co-sponsors all over the state and ask my colleagues in New Haven if needed for an answer, just so that my colleagues in New Haven are not fielding phone calls from all over the place and not knowing who anybody is. So we stick to that routine and it works really well and makes things run very smoothly. So once the family arrives, I, as the case manager and the supervisor of the group, I meet with the group and the family 3 times during the R&P period, once within 10 days of the family arriving, and then another meeting halfway through the R&P period, which we decided to create as a meeting. It's not required by R&P, but it's helpful for us because it's usually after all of the benefits have been put in place and the kids have been put in school, and we can focus on issues, usually employment, and can dedicate our time to discussing how well the family is doing and how well the prospective job holder is doing in that process. And that discussion leads into the 90-day meeting, which all R&P case managers know about. That's closing out the grant and making sure all the expenses are accounted for and making sure that the R&P core services checklist is checked off. But in our co-sponsor arrangement, that is just the end of the R&P period. It is not the end of the co-sponsorship period. At that point, I changed my hat from being an R&P case manager to being a post-R&P case manager, and I continue to work with the client and the group for the rest of the year in the context of the co-sponsorship relationship. and for up to 5 years after the family has arrived as their case manager contact during the ORR period, in line with the contract that we have with ORR. So after the 6-month meeting, which is kind of a parting of the ways, if you will, not literally, but it's meant to show that by that point, we will have had discussions and made arrangements so that the family can start to be more independent and less dependent on the co-sponsor, and the co-sponsor can take a step back from their responsibilities, not in total, because they co-sign the lease and need to make sure that the property is in good order at the end of the lease, but also just to have a contact in case of emergencies or other unique situations. And throughout all of that, I am reachable by the clients as well as the co-sponsors in case anything should come up. And then at the end of the first year, the family either stays where they are and assumes the lease on their own, or they move, and if the house is in good order and the co-sponsor is confident that they can get their security deposit back, they may gift a security deposit for the next home for the family just to help them move. And then until they've been in the country for 5 years, I'm available for troubleshooting with benefits, which is something I do quite a lot. And in light of the pandemic, I was interfacing with a lot of my former clients about unemployment issues. But there also might be issues that come up with the family and the group needs some help to deal with it. So interventions of various kinds, I serve that role during the ORR period, and routinely provide advice and referrals depending on whatever the matter is. So the last thing I'm going to say is that depending on where you are, it's really, really important that you have a good relationship with your state refugee coordinator, because in a statewide program like ours, the Connecticut State Refugee Coordinator played an incredible role in bringing all of the statewide offices into line so that they knew that there were refugees being resettled throughout Connecticut. They all have my contact information, and it just makes things much easier to deal with when it comes time for me to sort of advocate behind the scenes using secure email with state agencies. So other states that are larger may want to network similarly with state agencies in your metro areas. So now I'm going to hand this back to Anne, who is going to provide the co-sponsor perspective on responsibilities and communications.
So for those of you that don't know, I actually was a former co-sponsor. So participated in a group, leading a group to resettle a Syrian family of 4. But just to give you a quick overview, from the co-sponsor group perspective, the time period is really just 3 distinct areas. So there's the pre-arrival to green light. And during that time, we're communicating within our group and just with Ashley McCarr. Ashley is part-time, her title is community liaison, but she's really guiding us through the application process and the group formation and organization process that she talked about. But we're really organizing ourselves, talking within our group, trying to collect volunteers, collect funds, collect furniture, up until the green light. From post-arrival resettlement phase, it's the first year. We know that our goal is to get them self-sufficient by 6 months or before, as Greg will continue to tell us, starting at, 15 days in, Greg? Will continue to tell us that we need to work with the family to get them to self-sufficiency by 6 months. But we are constant communication within the group. But during that time frame, we have shifted our communication solely to working with Greg. We request that Iris requests that the groups have 1 point contact person, and that person be only talking with Greg, not going to other sources within Iris. That does 2 things. It not only streamlines things for Iris, but it also forces the group to funnel up questions and issues through the group leader, so that the group leader has a sense for how all the different functions are going. After the first year, the post-resettlement phase, as a group leader, my role is to help my group disengage, to stop ideally organizing things for the family, and to just become the wonderful friends and community that we want to be for the long haul, and to let everybody have a little bit of a rest. That having been said, if I shift to my Iris hat, At that point, we try to meet with the group from a community engagement perspective and see what they need after the resettlement phase, after the first year, to stay loosely engaged in the mission. So at that point, let's move on to the next slide, Zini. I'm going to stop because I think a lot of you know these things and we can address them in the Q&A, and I want to make sure that we have ample time for the breakout sessions, but we do work with the groups on ongoing community engagement after, in between families, as well as during mergers of groups. That happens naturally as well for towns that are next to each other. And we offer them tools and assets to keep their volunteers and communities engaged, whether it's panels. The speakers that Ashley spoke about during the seed planning process can be really helpful in these in-between periods as well. We also are providing professional networking amongst the community group leaders. And Greg has been developing a professional development plan for the group leaders and the management teams within the groups, with input from those groups, so really leveraging their expertise. We also have involved our group leaders a great deal in terms of press involvement, in-kind drives, and some of them have also stepped up to co-sponsor asylum-seeking families. So just a few ways in which they have continued to be involved after the resettlement phase. So if we can go ahead to the next slide, what we want to do is give you guys a break. Everybody is beyond Zoom weary. So we're going to send you to breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, we're going to ask that you introduce yourself to one another after you take a quick restroom break and grab a drink. You talk a little bit about what you still want to know about the IRIS model. And we really want you to be brutally honest as to what sounds impossible or what your biggest fear is about community sponsorship or this model, because we want those questions to come back into the Q&A session. So we'd love for you to have a little bit of time to talk. So we're going to take a break there, and we're going to bring everybody back at 3:15 because we want to highlight the other program. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your break. So welcome back. Hope that was a nice break. For those of you that had a chance to meet one another and identify, you know, what you wanted to hear more about or what's scaring you most about co-sponsorship, you can either ask those questions during the Q&A at the end, or you can drop them in the chat in the interim. Right now, what I wanted to do is to impersonate yet another refugee resettlement professional who goes by the name of Shelly Krusek at Lutheran Social Services in the National Capital Area. We've got her slides, and her director will present at the workshop on Friday, but she couldn't be here. But we will, as I mentioned before, send these slides out to you so you can go check out their program. They have a slightly different program. It's tiered. So it's a form of community co-sponsorship that delegates different elements of the RNP tasks to groups based upon the group's interest. And as you can see, you can check out their website to check out the program. But if you go to the second slide for LSS, Zini, they have provided you a quick overview of their new commitment form. And that involves the person who runs the program really stepping through with the group the level of commitment that they are interested in. And they've already put that together. On the next slide gives an overview of the different elements of their program in a kind of comparative fashion. So how long has the program existed? It's been since 2016 that it was formalized, but they've, as an organization, they've had community sponsorship for quite a while. They have roughly 50 partner congregations and groups during that time, since 2016, and their groups average 5 to 10 core team members. Do the volunteers do RNP tasks? Yes, they do a range of tasks based upon the group's commitment and preferences. The position that oversees the program is the Community Relations Director, and they have resettled approximately 335 in fiscal year 2019 and about 180 in 2018 through this program. Again, it's a tiered program, so it's different from IRIS from that perspective. They also, in terms of the estimate of the program costs for the affiliate, they estimate roughly 4 to 5K in ongoing staffing costs or a step to stand it up, and then 10 to 12,000 partial salaries to maintain it. So that's a little bit less of an investment relative to the IRIS program, but also I think that's a reflection of the full delegation of the resettlement task to the groups in the IRIS program, which necessitates more oversight and time. Lastly, do they provide training? And if so, how much? Yes, they definitely do provide training. They have a manual and a resource library as well. So that is just a quick overview of the LSS program. We'll also provide you in the follow-up email with the contact person at the LSS, Shelby, and she'll be able to answer questions if you are interested in their program. Next, I wanted to welcome a co-presenter, so I don't have to imitate anybody anymore or impersonate, and that is Minda Schweitzer from Home for Refugees, their asylum program. So they actually pair groups of volunteers with asylum seekers, and they're based out of Los Angeles, California. Just for a point of clarity, you may have run across their name in partnership with IRIS LA, which is a different resettlement affiliate. Home for Refugees and IRIS LA received a grant under the Catalyst Fund, but this program that we've asked Minda to present about is their work before the Catalyst Fund support in working with asylum seekers. So from there, Minda, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you for having me and sharing about our asylum program. We have two programs: our Refugee SIV program and and then also our asylum seeking program. And I just wanted to kind of give a context because we're a national coaching program based out of LA, and so I'm the founder, executive director. So I started it out of California and 4 years ago. And so it was out of the refugee crisis. And then also when refugees slowed down, then there was the asylum seeking crisis. And then we're near the border. So all of what you see in the next 3 slides is us putting together things as we go. We mainly responded to a need and then tried to create a structure. So just to say, we have for our refugee program, that's when we do co-sponsorship, and we partner with IRC, IILA, IRIS LA. And then for our asylum seeking program, we have kind of a partnership with other immigration agencies that all do different parts, like Families Belong Together, Alo Cholado, Together Rising, Haitian Bridge Alliance. And so we function a lot out of partnerships and strengths for each agency. And we specialize in teams and case management and caring for the families once they arrive. So we have so for our asylum seeking teams, because for our refugee SIV teams, there's always like a consistent 5 or 6 people per team. Our asylum seeking program is definitely a very creative program that we seek to meet in creative ways the needs of the asylum seeker according to the case management for the 90 days for the refugee program. And so this is the categories of our checklist that we have for each family. So there's like general, that's like a catch-all, establish good communication. There's housing, a goal, connect families to existing community programs. Finance, like budgeting, education, ESL, get kids enrolled in school. You could probably hear all the checkoffs of a 90-day case management plan. With the asylum seekers themselves, it's a little bit more precarious because they don't have social services support. So we have the checklist, we do an initial assessment, we have the teams locate resources within the community, we provide orientation to each family, and then we receive feedback from the family. because there is a lot more explaining how to do things with an asylum seeking family, because they tend to come from more dire circumstances, like how to ride a bus, or how to get places, or how to sign up for different services. So there's a lot of each volunteer and our coaches spend a lot of time talking with the families, and having the same goal, but talking through their situation. Next slide. And here are, I did like a data analysis from looking at our teams the last couple of years. And before I describe this, I should say that we are funded through private sponsors, through churches and congregations, synagogues, and grants. And it's all undesignated funds towards resettlement in general. So we get to choose how to best respond to the situation. So that's given us a lot of freedom to work with the asylum seeking community. And for our refugee, SIV, and asylee teams, we do 1 year commitments. But for our asylum seeking teams, that it could take, like we're now on our second year with some teams, and our end goal is the work permit. So let me talk through this. So we have, in total, we actually have 52 teams, but our number of asylum seeking teams is 29, and they range from 1 to 6 volunteers plus one of our coaches. And I have to say 1 to 6 because on your 2 or 2.5, we have volunteer fatigue. So that's not exactly so with refugees, SIV, and asylee teams. So, and then the countries represented from our asylum seekers are 5 countries, and they all 29 fit into these 5: Cameroon, Chechnya, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. And the top 2 are 3, and then the rest are the bottom 3. This is a big issue is housing. So 15 sponsors have offered housing, and there has been, so that means the other portion of the 29 found their housing. And that's when we've partnered with other organizations, immigration organizations, where they found the housing, and then we provide the teams. All 29 have lawyers, and that's how we've partnered with other organizations who have gotten them lawyers. In this process, only 9 have received their work permits out of 2 years. So that is a big surprise. And 1 has been granted asylum. So here at the top, I put big surprise. Original timeline target for work permits, 6 months. And in reality, we're on 2 years and counting. So we're experiencing volunteer fatigue. So it's, there's a lot of creativity, as I say, and we go forth and trust to try to keep up, coming alongside them. So let's see, we started with 1 asylum team in 2018. We added 21 in 2019 all at once, and 8 more in 2020. And those families were the ones reunified after being separated from their children, and then now they've been reunified, and we're helping them resettle. 3 of the 29 teams have officially ended their year. 19 teams are going on their 3rd year. There's a typo here. I meant 17 teams right there instead of just 7 are on their 2nd year. And then depending on the state, the average donation amount to raise for a family of 5, if the team is covering living expenses, we found is $2,500. Rent, bills, food, basic clothes, bus, And teams range, depending on donations, from 0 to 2,500, and I meant to put month, depending on donations. Let's see, and these are the, you don't have to turn the slide back, but the 2,500 is when I went back through our receipts, because we have a fund and disbursement ability where the teams could each fundraise and have an account and then dispersing. And so that was based on receipts and disbursements that went out the last couple of years. This is the last slide, and it's not for you to actually read it all, but it's to give you the idea that this is crazy just when you do it the housing, and that's why I put 3 question marks. So bottom line, it's complicated, but then also bottom line, it's worth it because their families and individuals' lives are worth it. So so I have over here on the left are sponsored families and individuals without that came without sponsored housing. And then on the right is sponsored families with sponsored housing, with the sponsor providing the housing. So back on the left, that's where I'll just say a lot of agencies are wondering, how do we answer the housing question? And that's what is keeping people from experimenting and going into the realm of asylum seeking case management. But I want to say, when you start taking on an asylum seeking family, you may not know all the answers all at once, but they actually fall into place. Like with each of our asylum seeking families without housing, like we've been able to find, and it's all case by case, like one family from Chechnya just figured out that a family member from Chechnya could pay their rent. Another single man from Cameroon, he figured out that there was a Cameroonian community and they let him stay in their apartment for free. And then the team just brought donated food and household items each week. Some asylum seekers have family here that they could stay with, but there may be family that just arrived also just a little bit ago, so they could provide the housing, but not the support. So as you can see, once you enter into the details and personal details of the relationship, you're able to figure out how that housing question could be answered. But it is complicated. And so each of these I put our client number, because when I look down and I don't, and then I try to keep out the names, I know them by number. State they resettled, so we coach all these states. Country of origin, year they came and started their team, and what type of housing and work permit status. So it's if I said 9 of these right here have received work permits, and that has been a big surprise because that has been the marker to end our teams, and they've kept going. So one of the things just to end with is that we've been doing like for asylum seeking teams, year commitments initially, and then re-upping each year and filling in new volunteers with other volunteers that would like to take a break. So that was our creative approach. So this is what we do with asylum seekers.
Great, thank you, Minda. Really appreciate all of that. And so at this point, we're going to move into the Q&A phase. And I just want to go ahead and thanks Minda again, as well as the LSS NCA team who provided their slides and will present next time for all the time that's gone into this in terms of sharing potential models. So we also have Alexine Casanova, who's our Senior Director of Programs at IRIS, has joined us to help kind of answering the questions depending upon those that have come in. And we can probably stop the screen share if you don't mind, Zini, and go back to the group format. I'm going to try my best to be quarterback here in terms of questions. So in reverse order, I just want to make sure for those that might be calling in that you can see that we answered in the chat a few questions already. One of which was somebody had commented that they really liked the video at the beginning, and I provided a link to our YouTube channel that has a playlist of all the co-sponsor videos. There are a number of very short videos that are provided there that are generic, that do not have Iris's name throughout them, like the how to build a co-sponsorship program video. Those promotional videos you can use for your own purposes. They're there for you to download and use at speaking engagements or provide other co-sponsors to use. So there's a link there in the chat. We'll also include it in the follow-up video. Somebody else, Kristen asked, is the co-sponsor application and manual on your website as well? It is absolutely out there. So we provided a link to the IRIS website. I believe Minda's manual for her program is also available through the RCUSA website that we'll provide in the follow-up link as well. But everything that you find on Iris's website under co-sponsor family is yours to lift and run with. Everything in terms of the application that Ashley provided and otherwise. We also, there was a question from Kristen about the fundraising. Does the co-sponsor group raise the money and give it all to the agency, or do they keep the money themselves? In our model, the group has to find their own fiduciary, a not-for-profit fiduciary that's local to them. They do the fundraising and they hold on to those funds for specified purposes to provide support to the family. So those funds do not come to us. We do provide them a budgeting tool that you'll see on our website as well, so they can try to understand how the family's finances are going to fit together in terms of that mosaic of resources, so that they can estimate based upon the rent costs in their community how much they're going to need to raise. We give them a goal of anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 depending upon the rent subsidy they may need to provide. Another question that has come in is, does IRIS track that money? No, we do not. The groups track it. We only track it in terms of funds that can be reimbursed through R&P funds. A question that came up with that I'm going to ask Alexine to address here is, when does placement occur with co-sponsors in the assurance arrival timeline?
Sure, thanks, Anne. Thanks for that question. So we won't place a case with a co-sponsor until we have an arrival notice. There are some situations where we might, see a case in the pipeline and think it might be a good match for a co-sponsor, especially if there's a U.S. tie in a location that there's also a co-sponsor that we know should be ready soon, but we will not make any official placement until we actually get the arrival notice. And that's why it's important for groups to be ready, to tell us when they're ready. And being ready means that they're ready to take a case with, 2 weeks notice, which is fairly typical of how long we have once we know a case is actually coming.
Great. And then there was a follow-on question to that, Alexine, that came from Taffy Webb. Do you have a process in place where once the family arrives, they can opt in or opt out of the co-sponsor program? For example, can the family opt to receive services from the affiliate instead of the group? And if so, how do we manage that process and the group's expectations?
So no, we don't have any kind of mechanism for that. And it isn't actually something that has happened. We haven't had cases who were placed with co-sponsors, request to leave the co-sponsor. Generally cases that have co-sponsors are happy with their situation, and cases that don't oftentimes are not aware of co-sponsorship's existence, or they're also happy with their situation. So it's not a recurring issue. I do think it's a good question and something to think about, but because our model, in our model, the co-sponsorship starts at time of arrival. The idea that someone might opt in and have already received certain services and then begin to be co-sponsored, it doesn't really work. We have had in very, very rare cases where someone who's been here longer was placed with a co-sponsor, but it was sort of a separate exceptional thing and not related to R&P or the sort of normal model.
Great, thanks, Alexine. Let's see, another question, for a different area. I'll answer this a little bit and then I'll ask Chris to expand upon it. But can you provide information about grant opportunities for refugee speakers? So we have found grants through some local foundations, one that's called the International Association of New Haven. So that wouldn't apply outside of the New Haven area, but also some support through our community foundation, a specialized grant for our community engagement services. And then there's a family foundation that has provided a little bit of support. It's a TRIP foundation, but it's a Connecticut-based foundation. But what we have found that works in general is that once you have a relationship with a family foundation that has more flexibility, or a community foundation, and they understand your services, then they begin to understand the power of supporting the refugees. Chris, anything you would add to that in terms of finding grants to support the outreach services?
Yeah, and again, this is not something that every refugee resettlement agency is experienced in doing, but I think all of us have realized at one time or another, who better in the United States is there to go into schools and help educate Americans about refugees and refugee resettlement. It's really us. So you can appeal to people who believe in public education, including the study of refugees and refugee resettlement in their classes, in their curriculum. And it's a very attractive initiative. And the refugee speakers are part of that. I bet you half the people on the screen have been invited to go in and talk to a social studies class or speak in front of a high school auditorium or something like that. This is just a way of professionalizing that and expanding on it, reaching more schools and including refugees in the group of speakers. Sure, we might be, more fluent in English and better on our feet, but nothing is more powerful than a refugee speaker who is maybe close to the age of the students in the classroom that she or he is speaking to.
Thanks.
You'll raise money for this, I promise you.
So the next questions I wanted to address just a little bit, and then really kind of put in the space between Greg and Ashley and Alexine and whoever wants to jump on that. And that is, how do you ensure that the co-sponsor groups are quote unquote qualified to provide specific RNP services? For example, mental health needs as one example, but how do we identify that they're qualified? Maybe Ashley, you can speak to the onboarding process, and then Greg and Alexine, you can finish.
Sure, yeah. So the application really does require them to either demonstrate that they have people in their group who have certain skills. Well, both, that they have people in their group who have certain skills, but more importantly, that they have identified those resources and how to access them within their own communities. So for example, identifying mental health providers in their area who will accept Medicaid and who can provide interpreters, and also coming up with this is more related to the training, but coming up with a mental health emergency plan. So basically through the process of the application of identifying resources and how to access them and the skills of the people in the group, as well as through the training program, we are able to be confident that the groups are well prepared, because we really have a high bar of expectations.
Greg or Alexine, anything to tack on to that?
No, I would agree with Ashley that, the application itself is meant to, ask the groups to comprehensively document their resources. And sometimes they will identify specific people, maybe not by name, but they may say, in the question about mental health resources, there could be someone who has an experience, doing intakes, or as a psychiatrist or psychologist or something. And although it wouldn't be appropriate for them to provide direct service to a client, at least we know there's a mental health professional who's qualified to make a referral. particularly if there's a family where mental health issues have been identified in the arrival notice. That would be something we would pay attention to in selecting the group.
Great.
Now, the second part of that question was about financial support. If that is referring to financial support to the family or fundraising in terms of having enough on hand.
I can clarify with the person and get back.
Okay.
Alexine, is there anything else that you would add about making sure that the groups are qualified?
Sure. I would just add that, as much as we are asking a lot of the groups, we're never leaving them on their own. Iris is always there as a partner and as a backup and as a guide. So with something, as serious as, a mental health need, we're not expecting the groups to just take care of it on their own. So, Greg is in frequent contact with the groups and would consult and advise and support if ever, they before anything and before they were making decisions, along the lines of what was best to do in that kind of situation.
Great. There was a question, maybe Greg, does the co-sponsor cover rent for only the RNP period or for the full first year?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer this question by trying not to get too wonky because we have this explained in the manual. So the simplest way to explain this is that co-sponsor groups provide rental assistance in conjunction with the grant money that is available from RNP. So we have our own rental assistance policy that we apply to that, such that a family may receive 3 months of rental assistance or 6 months of rental assistance. The only month that is actually paid in full is the first one. We ask our clients to start contributing half of their cash assistance towards rent in the second month, while the co-sponsor would cover the balance for the period constituting rental assistance. If someone is living in a high rent area, let's just say for the sake of argument, a 3-bedroom apartment in New Haven, we would not pay more than $1,300 for that. In Stamford, Connecticut, which is only 45 minutes away, but closer to New York, and therefore much more expensive, $1,000 more per month. That means the family placed in Stamford will not pay more than $1,300 a month for that apartment, and the group supporting them in Stamford would have to pay the $1,000 balance for the duration of the lease. So it depends on the amount of the rent, it depends on the level of rental assistance and the location.
I thought I would also direct that question to Minda in a different way. For your teams, when they are having to, I would assume at some point, supplement rent and other costs, are they doing the fundraising and then dispersing of those funds, or does your organization and case management oversight provide that?
Yeah, so, okay. This is where each team, there is one team that took on all the fundraising, and they fundraised by month, and they went through their church. So so each case is a little bit different, but yes, then they would fundraise, and then we would give it out to each family each month for a disbursement. That's your question?
Yeah, I was just curious about that and thought that it might be a question that folks would get to on their own as well. Let's see. There's a question that somebody posed, Jackie, about the Catalyst Fund. And I would suggest that you actually put that question directly to the Catalyst Fund through the communitycosponsorship.org website. And we'll drop that in the link in the chat because that's specific to the application process. And we at IRIS, nor Minda and the others, we're not involved in reviewing the applications or the criteria. So that's a good question, but go ahead and put it straight to the Catalyst Fund website. Just kind of clicking through if my colleagues see another question. Oh, there was a question about the staffing structure for managing the co-sponsorship program. Alexine, do you want to address that one overall?
Sorry, Anne, there was a blip. Can you just repeat quickly the question?
Sure, no problem. Can you describe Iris's staffing structure for managing the co-sponsorship program?
Sure. So Greg plays a role in managing the groups. He is both case manager officially to the case, but also primarily works with the groups to ensure that they are providing the services as required. And then I work closely with Greg, again, for a level of oversight, ensuring that, the documentation is all correct, troubleshooting with him to resolve problems. And then there are other people also providing different kinds of oversight. We have a director of finance who's, giving the financials another once over. And then Chris, of course, as well. So we do have, several people involved at different layers. I would just say too that, there's sort of different ways of dividing up the program and what it includes and how it needs to be managed. So there's the outreach, training, recruitment of co-sponsors. That's all sort of one area of work. And then there's the actual implementation of the program, the case management work. And from my perspective, and I oversee, all of our case management programs at IRIS. So from my perspective, once the case is placed, it is an RMP program, and it's very much a part of RMP, and it's kind of managed in the same ways our more traditional RMP is. So I hope that helps answer the question.
Yeah, I think that's great. We'll also include in the follow-up email an overview of our org chart and a rough estimate of how much time each person spends on the program. Taffy went to the head of the class and asked for that of us about a month or so ago. And we actually got kind of detailed and tried to estimate over the past 5 years. Taffy, thank you very much for each person involved, but trying to go that FTE per case route. But in general, Greg's full-time on it, but he's the only one that's full-time on it. And by the way, Ashley is a part-time employee. So she's roughly 20 hours a week, but it's only when our program is in full tilt, like in 2016 and 17, that all of her time is spent on helping groups through the process. So there's a lot of bit of flexibility there. So just going through the other questions, wanted to make sure. There's a recent question that says somebody recently saw that the IRIS co-sponsor teams include 25 people or more. How do you manage background check process for these large groups? That is true that the groups are 25 or more, and Ashley and Greg and Chris can attest to that. When it's too small, then the groups burn out. But managing the background checks we do through Sterling Volunteers, so it's an all online process. And we chose that particular platform because then we can set up a subgroup to our parent account, and we can see that they are moving along, and we approve those background checks. But we also hold them, but they can send the links out themselves. So we have a process set up with Sterling Volunteers to do that. So that was a pretty straightforward question, easy one. At Minda Schweitzer, one of our sites is piloting an asylum seeker co-sponsorship program in Chicago, and they would love to connect with you. And
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, connect, and then
so Minda, if you can drop your email into the chat, that would be great. And then you're going to have a lot more new friends.
Yes, and I wanted to emphasize something that I said in my 7-minute presentation. We partner. We don't do this alone. So if anybody wanted to partner, I'm just giving that as an open invitation. We love, caring for the asylum seekers, refugees, SIVs with a lot of people.
Great. Excellent. So I think we have covered the majority of the questions, if not all of them. We'll try to go back through and email folks if we have them. You can also send us follow-up questions after the process. And then just to remind everybody, the reason we set this up so that people would attend this workshop first before doing a one-on-one consultation is we didn't want to cover all of this 45 times or 70 times, however many applicants there were. But we also wanted you to consider other programs like MENDAS, like LSS-NCA, because obviously the Catalyst Fund is looking for whatever is ambitious for your organization. At IRIS, we think that the full co-sponsorship program is a great model, and that you'll get the most out of that. But again, you can set up after this if you want to email me to set up a consultation with a member of our team in regards to your proposal. So with that, I just wanted to hand it back to Chris for kind of a sign off and wrap up, because I think we're there.
Great, thanks a lot. So I, again, just want to say that, you know, this is, the Catalyst Fund is an unusual grant for a refugee agency to be applying for. It is not about services to refugees, it's about engaging the public. And the more people you engage, and the more responsibilities they have, the deeper their connection, the more profound their experience, then I think the stronger the proposal. You know, think back to that spectrum, that slide that showed a spectrum of community engagement. You know, the further along you are on that spectrum, the more you'll be meeting the Catalyst Fund criteria and objectives. So thank you all for participating. I'm actually coming to you from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm down here, a combination of personal and business stuff, and I am speaking to you from the Kentucky Refugee Ministries building, which is open, by the way. Everyone's got masks on except me, because I'm alone in the room. But I hope all of us can return to the level of activities that we really want. And bringing in more than 100,000 refugees per year. You've been talking with your nationals, you've been talking with colleagues. It's going to be a stretch. And a way to make it a little easier is to engage a lot of community groups. So good luck.